In our study of Genesis today, I want to look at Noah. I introduced Noah. I explained how his name, Comfort, points us to viewing him as a type of Messiah, that his life and work and ministry are prophetic. And so I want to give an overview of some of the other ways that Noah's life is prophetic. And what I'm going to do is look at some of the New Testament scriptures that talk about Noah, that reveal what was the Jewish mindset, because these are Jews writing about this, thinking about this, talking about this, and they reflect Jewish interpretation of the time about Noah. And so we're going to begin to see how certain events, people, fit a pattern. And we see those patterns repeat, develop in some way, in a way that points us to ultimately the final fulfillment of these patterns, which is Jesus Christ, His return, His coming, the final day. All of these things are pointed to in some ways through various scriptures. So that's what we're going to look at. Let me just first point out one example of how we see these patterns develop. And we've already seen some as far as how one child is designated as the one who is going to be the seed through whom the promise is fulfilled, but not the one you expect, not the firstborn, but another one. And we see that comes up again and again in Genesis. With Noah, Noah is told, make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it, and coat it with pitch inside and out. That's Genesis 6:14. That's not the last time we're going to hear something like that. In Exodus 2, verse 3, it says, when she, the mother of Moses, could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. So here's someone making an ark, putting it in water. It's the same word in Hebrew, ark there and basket here. Our English obscures this a bit, but it's the same word, also covered in pitch, same word. And another person who represents the Messiah to come, in this case Moses, Moses is full of examples of how he points to what the Messiah will be like. And Moses also is placed in this ark, if you will, to be carried through the waters to safety from certain death. And so we see a relationship between these two stories, a connection, and they're pointing forward to a more full, complete connection. So what could that be? What are some New Testament verses that speak about Noah and the flood? Luke 17, verses 26 and 27. Jesus says, just as it was in the days of Noah, so also will it be in the days of the Son of Man. People were eating, drinking, marrying, and being given in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. And then the flood came and destroyed them all. Later on, Jesus talks about how there will be bodies at the time of the coming of the Son of Man when He will take some. One will be taken, the other left. This is the passage, or one of the two places Jesus talks about this. Sometimes people call this the rapture, but I don't think that this is the rapture. When Jesus says they will be taken, the disciples ask in Luke 17:37, where, Lord? They asked, and He replied, where there is a dead body, there the vultures will gather. Meaning, those who are taken are those who are taken in judgment, those who die, just like so many were killed in the flood. And so Jesus draws a comparison. He says, just as it was in the days of Noah, it's going to be that way in the time when the Son of Man comes in judgment. People are going to be eating, drinking, marrying. They're going to be going about business as usual. They're not going to see what is coming. They're going to be enjoying themselves, enjoying life, when they should be preparing for the judgment to come. And so Jesus is clearly alluding to an interpretation of the Noah story, because this isn't really laid out clearly in Genesis 6, 7, and 8. That we don't really know what the people are doing, what they're thinking about Noah building the ark. But Jewish tradition is full of stories of how Noah, by building the ark, was warning the people about what was coming, and he actively preached and warned them, but they went about their business. That's exactly what Jesus is referring to. The flood gives us a sort of paradigm or a pattern, a setting of what to expect in the second coming. Here's another example of a passage in the New Testament speaking about Noah and the flood. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 and 9 says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to Tartarus," is the literal, or sometimes it's translated hell. I don't think it's exactly what we think of as the hell, the final place of judgment for the wicked. But I'm not going to get too far into that. But God does this. It says, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. So this isn't the final hell. This is a place being kept for judgment. And Peter goes on, "If he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others." Both of these are references to the flood story. The angels who sinned, I think, are the sons of God described in Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4. And God has imprisoned them until the time of judgment. The ungodly people are those who Jesus referred to, who were eating, drinking, marrying, and weren't paying attention to the call to repentance, the call to turn from wickedness. And God was able to bring judgment on them. Peter goes on, "If he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah." So he's repeating different things that show a pattern in history. And he says, "And if he rescued Lot, a righteous man," and then he goes on to say, "If this is so, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to hold the unrighteous for punishment on the day of judgment." So Peter says we're to learn from the flood story that this is how God acts. You see it at the flood. You see it at Sodom and Gomorrah. You see this pattern of what we should expect is to come. 1 Peter 3:19 is another place we see this. "After being made alive, he," talking about Jesus, "went and made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits." Which imprisoned spirits? The sons of God from Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4 that we just saw 2 Peter reference. "He made proclamation to the imprisoned spirits, to those who were disobedient long ago when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built. In it only a few people, 8 in all, were saved through water." And now here Peter is talking specifically about how these 8, Noah and the other 7 family members, are saved through the waters of the flood. And he draws, there's a type, there's a pattern, there's a teaching there. And he says, "This water symbolizes baptism that now saves you also. Not the removal of dirt from the body, but the pledge of a clear conscience toward God. It saves you by the resurrection of Jesus Christ." So Noah was saved through water. You also are saved through water. That's the comparison Peter is making. Now, what does that mean? Well, Jewish tradition viewed the flood as a type of mikveh. Mikveh is simply a Hebrew word speaking of immersion in water. It's where we get the Christian picture of baptism from. And the Old Testament is full of teachings about immersion in water. And so there's a connection made by the Jewish rabbis that I think is intentional in the Torah, that there's a connection about these 8 going through the water and the earth being cleansed and sort of this restarting of all of the earth, and mikvahs, immersions, so that you come out ritually clean. It's sort of like a fresh start, a new start. And so there's a connection between the flood story and all of these different ritual immersions taught in the Old Testament. And Peter now takes that interpretation and says, the final ultimate fulfillment is the baptism you've undergone in Christ Jesus. There is a cleansing, there is a new start, there is a purity that comes through that baptism. And he specifically says, not the removal of dirt from the body, not the literal water, but what's going on behind this act of faith, this commitment to Jesus Christ. And so in the minds of the apostles, baptism always accompanied salvation. It wasn't that the baptism itself, the physical act, saved you, but it was that it pictured, symbolized, and was connected to what happened through faith when Christ saved you. And it connects us back to this picture of being saved through the floodwaters, being cleansed through the floodwaters, having a new beginning through the floodwaters. So Peter draws on that Jewish tradition to make that connection with Christian baptism. In other passages, Hebrews 11, verse 7. By faith, Hebrews says, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By his faith he condemned the world and became heir of righteousness that is in keeping with faith. So here again is drawing on how Noah, through his faith, through building the ark, condemned the world of unrighteousness. Because they had a warning. Why is this righteous man building a huge boat? Because there's judgment coming. There's a flood coming. And Noah was warned about these things. And so he is a model of salvation through faith. Just as Abraham will be, just as many others in the Old Testament will be, Noah is that model of salvation through faith alone. All right, let me go through one other thing that's maybe something you haven't heard of before, or a bit more you might call mystical in interpretation. Mystical not meaning secretive, spiritual, direct revelation, but in Jewish understanding, a mystical interpretation of the text is something that's there in the text but requires sort of deep contemplation and comparison with many other texts to see a message that's not immediately obvious. And this has to do with the calendar. In Genesis, we read about all of these different dates of when certain things happen. And so I want to read just a few of those. Some of them we don't really know the significance, but some of them do seem to be significant. They're all found in Genesis chapter 8. And I want to use this to introduce at this stage that dates in the Old Testament that are connected to specific events tend to have some kind of significance in these patterns. In other words, a date, something that's significant that happens in one place in the Bible, comes up often in other places in the Bible because there's some connection between what's going on these dates. And this will come into play when we look at some other things later on in the Old Testament. Genesis 8 verse 4 is an example of this. And on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. What is the 17th day of the 7th month? Well, the first month, by Noah's reckoning, would be in the fall. In fact, even today, the New Year, Rosh Hashanah, is the Jewish New Year, falls in the fall. And so the 7th month would be a significant month. It would be the month of Nisan in the calendar today. And something special happens in Nisan, Passover. When is the Passover lamb slaughtered? The 14th day of the month of Nisan. This would be Noah's 7th month. Well, what's significant about that? Well, I believe Jesus was crucified on the 15th of Nisan. He celebrated Passover with his disciples on Thursday evening, and then the next day would be the 15th of Nisan. He's crucified. Saturday is the 16th of Nisan, and Sunday then would be the 17th of Nisan. So Genesis 8:4 speaks of the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark coming to rest. Remember, Noah is the one who's going to bring rest. Jesus is the one who ultimately fulfills and brings rest, especially in his resurrection from the dead. And so the ark comes to rest on the very date of the Hebrew calendar when Jesus is going to rise from the dead. Now, maybe that's just a coincidence. Well, let me look at two other events. Genesis 8:6 says, after 40 days Noah opened a window he had made in the ark and sent out a raven, and it kept flying back and forth until the water had dried up from the earth. Noah opens a window. I just thought of this now, that it's 40 days after the resurrection that Jesus ascends into heaven. I hadn't even thought of that till just now. But it's also an important date on the Jewish calendar. Genesis 8:6 is the 10th of Av. This 40 days after the 17th of Nisan, when you add it up, you come to the 10th of Av. Now, this isn't significant because that is the day the first temple was destroyed. And it follows after a day-long fast on the 9th of Av that's very famous in Judaism because a number of terrible events happen on the 9th of Av throughout Jewish history, including when the temple was first breached, the first temple, the second temple as well. You even find in more modern times that the orders for the Holocaust were signed on the 9th of Av. It's a very odd date. It comes up in many places in Jewish history. And it is a day of fasting. And so Jewish people, the rabbis have looked at this and thought, after the day of fasting, the 9th of Av, that's when Noah releases this raven. So that date definitely stands out. Genesis 8:13 is definitely a significant date. It says, by the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was dry. What is this? This is the first day. This is Rosh Hashanah, and it's like day one for the world. The world is ready to start anew. The waters have dried up. Noah is ready to come down and walk on the earth. That's this new start. It occurs not by coincidence on Rosh Hashanah. And I believe that is also a day going to be connected with Jesus' return. And so this is just beginning to see how some of these dates that we're not sure why they're mentioned in the Bible might tip us off to some significant dates in prophecy or some patterns of how God is going to work through history. And we'll see some of those dates come up again later on in the Torah.